Hello, my name is Ted Rao and I'm part of Sociocracy for All. And in this webinar, we're talking about forming communities. So communities where people have found each other and want to start a co-housing community together. I myself am sitting in Massachusetts, in Amherst, Massachusetts, in a co-housing community where I live myself. My community, however, was started in the 90s and people started moving in 1994. That was long before my time. And I moved here in 2012. And my community is run using Sociocracy, which we here call dynamic governance or DG, which is, by the way, the same thing as Sociocracy. And the first thing I want to talk about is the story of what I see happen again and again and again. It's always the same story. It's typically a group of people that get together to start a group. And then they typically either implicitly or explicitly make the decision to keep things informal until there's more people. Like, let's not talk about governance, or maybe that discussion doesn't even come up. There's sort of this implicit understanding of, well, let's wait. Or some groups have told me, we thought we'd wait until we're a community. Okay, so for whatever reason, they're putting things off. Here's what happens next. They notice, oh boy, we have to like make a lot of decisions already. We're not even a community yet, and there's so many decisions already. And then it's just a matter of time because there are a lot of big decisions to make. Some of them are hard. Um, and it's just what happens when people come together. There might be some conflict at some point. And typically without a system in place, unless there's tons of trust and people willing to do the work of reaching out and so on, uh, it's going to be hard to deal with whatever conflict there is. But then typically groups slug along and sort of continue. On the way, some people leave because they've had enough, and some people don't join because they're not interested. They hear about it and they're like, ah, that seems too messy of a thing to get involved in. Then what happens next is that the first people to start talking about, hey, we should look at governance. And then typically there's already a little bit of outrage of like, no, like we said we decide together. You can't change that now because we're deciding everything together and that's what we do. And then the question of governance becomes a political issue. All of a sudden, any conversation about governance will be already a political discussion because some people want this, some people want that. And then sort of that's where I'm going with this quote of like, you just want sociocracy because you want to, like determine what we're doing and how things are done and so on. And then some people are saying like, I don't know what you guys have been talking about. I don't even get how we're deciding things here. And that's when a lot of people leave also. And then the question becomes crystal clear to some people at least. And then it's, okay, so given where we are now with already this history, already our first conflicts that we've had together, already everything being slightly political questions here, how will we ever decide how we make decisions? And I would say that's almost a one-way street. Then it's already become really difficult to make any kind of transition. And we see it again and again and again and again. And to be honest, the reason we planned this webinar is because I'm so tired of seeing that very pattern play out again and again. Because once you're at that point, any person suggesting any kind of change will already get some pushback. And you might have heard me quote that before, but I remember a group reaching out to me and they saying, well, we all know that we want to hire you to help us with decision making, but we don't know who would make the decision to hire you. So we can't. I've never heard from that group again. And I know it's somewhat funny. I was actually thinking back then, like, okay, hold on. Is this a moment where I laugh or a moment where I cry? I'm not so sure because it sounds funny, but it's not funny at all, right? Because people have put all their passion and all their time into a project for, let's say, 2 years, and it dies because of the stupid reason that nobody knows how to make the decision of how to make the decision of how to make the decision. That's it. You checkmate it. It's a trap. And that's like when it becomes about people's life energy put into something, relationships built and so on, that's when it's not funny anymore, right? If that all goes down the drain for something as simple yet complex as governance. So that's why I put these arrows here. That's typically when groups contact us, and this is when we wish they contacted us, just before things happen. And I have to say, that is happening more and more and more often. So that's great. And that's basically, that's already half of what I wanted to say, because that to me is the most important thing. And some of you might be, hold on, some of you might be already here, and that's okay. You know, like I've seen it work to somehow turn things around. But it just becomes harder and harder the more deeply you're into it. And for example, sneak preview, and next week, those of you who are interested, once you already have been running for 15 years, it doesn't get easier at all. You might have more sense of a relationship and trust with each other. So that's what you can run on then, once you've already built and established things. So then if you have a relationship of trust, you can sort of work through that and make your way basically back to deciding about governance. So you have one thing speaking for you, but you have all the years of established culture already speaking against you. So that's a different kind of context. All right. So to not stop on, or to not sort of stay on this negative note, let's think about what would be the ideal state. Like if I could wave a magic wand as a governance person with quite some context in communities, what would I like to see happen? And here's my perfect scenario. We have somebody who starts a group, like, yay, let's start a group. Okay. Now, let's, by the way, have a shared understanding that once we're like 10-ish people, that's when we should start talking about governance. And then they start talking about governance. And some people leave, that because that always happens, because people's lives change, but not so they don't leave because of process. But people join and find a place where they can contribute over time because governance is put in place already. So now we already have a system where people can join and they find their place and everything is good. And then that happens over time, like over time as people join, there is already that place. So everything is humming along, everything is great. People get to know each other more deeply, move in. Yay, happy ending. What you might notice is that compared to the other picture where there was a lot of speech bubbles here, now it's just quiet, because to me what good governance is that it's quiet. People are just doing their thing. They're even not even noticing that there is such a thing like governance, because it's just happening. And so here's another story of when people want to visit Pioneer Valley co-housing because of sociocratic governance, or even Sociocracy for All because of governance. I call those Sociocracy tourists. They sometimes come here and want to attend meetings. And the first thing I typically tell them is, well, just so you know, the most exciting thing that there is to see here is that there's nothing to see. We're just having a meeting. That's what you're going to see, people having a meeting without any, like, you know, not a lot of tension, not a lot of this, not a lot of that. We're just doing our thing. And that's what we want from governance, right? We want to have governance basically be invisible, silent, smooth, so that people can focus on what they want to be doing together and on each other, on the relationship building. So the ideal governance is invisible. It's just making room, holding the space for relationships and shared action. So that's why it's so empty and bare here. That's what you see there in that empty and bareness is the absence of drama, basically. Okay, so what does it take to get there? To get to that ideal scenario of the happy ending? What does it take? So here's what I've seen, what it takes. Everybody needs to be trained well enough, good training and enough training so people can operate in the system, because the system like sociocracy, for example, or any kind of system really, but since sociocracy is slightly outside of what we've all been socialized with, it's even more important for a system like sociocracy. It only works well if everybody understands it, or at least enough people understand it well enough. Not everybody has to be an expert, but understanding it well enough so that what you're doing is actually, so that the governance system is actually alive in people's actions, right? Otherwise, if you only have it on paper, what good would it be? Okay. And then this might make sense because of my little storytelling here. An early decision on governance is what it takes, in my view. And yeah, I guess that will become more clear later when I show a little of what sort of the circle transition would look like. A circle system that grows with a group. So while 2 is basically just a commitment to we're going to run things sociocratically, then the circle system needs to be able to grow and be flexible and respond to the growth so that we always have the perfect fit for the moment that the group is in right now. For example, while you're still gathering people to have more households to join you into the project, that's a different stage than when you've just bought land and now it's more of like, I guess there's distinct stages of getting more members, getting to know each other, setting things up, then looking for land, then having land, and then focusing on building, and then moving in, and then that's sort of a different stage again when you've moved in. So I want to talk about each one of those 3. The longest I'm going to talk about this one, so just let's get this and that out of the way, I guess. So training everybody. Sociocracy for All has a strong background in community because many of our members and actually quite a few of our staff even live in community themselves or have deep connection to community. And my goal in Training Circle, in designing our training offerings, is to become a little bit of a candy store for sociocracy training. So we do these webinars. That's one thing. So, or this video. This is actually it should be on here, the arrow. So there's enough basic training for everybody so that people know what they're deciding about, what they're getting themselves into, basically. Then what we do is we run introductions, and you'll hear about that more also in an email that I'll send you so that you can find all these things. There is, some of you actually know that. I know that some of you know this. It's a study group curriculum that groups can watch together and do exercises together to already be in the context that you're going to be practicing all this stuff with if you decide to do so. So you have a training that resembles very much your circle practice that you will have later. Hold on, what's happening here? So then there is deepening. So now we're going back to the candy store here, basically. Facilitation training. We try to really offer everything that we think is needed up to any kind of level, really, up to training of trainers. Also, onboarding of new members is something that we're paying attention to that might not necessarily be on your radar quite yet if you're in sort of early stage of forming a group, but it will come up later once you have implemented a governance system and then people keep joining. You need to have a way of continuously onboarding people that are joining your group in terms of training them, for example, so that they can hit the ground running and really be productive members of your group. So that's training everybody. Plenty of opportunity, plenty of offers in the Sociocracy for All candy store. The most important thing for co-housing, I think, is this one, which I'm going to remind you again of at the end, because it's worked so well for co-housing communities. So I'm going to talk more about that later. Just so you know, out of all of these things, I think this is the one thing that you should keep in mind. So talking about the early decision on governance here, that was number 2 out of my list of 3 things. What does that mean, a decision about governance? So we think that making a decision about governance entails 3 things. One is a governance agreement, which is the description of your system. It's basically like the constitution or the rule book, or call it whatever. Like, what is the system that you agree to? Because sociocracy has different ways of doing it. So you need to describe which one is your version. Like, what are the words you use? What are the processes you use? What does it sound like when you say it? Then a training plan of, okay, to get there, to get to this system, what do people need to know, including onboarding, which I've already talked about. And what's important for me here is to get to a decision based on informed consent. Um, I've seen groups that are saying yes to sociocracy without really knowing what it is, which is I'm always admire and like the leap of faith there, but of course to really know what you are saying yes to, you have to know a little bit about it. And then an implementation plan. As we will see later, there is a moment where you're basically flipping the switch and you are shifting power into the places where it will stay. So you need to make a plan on when that will happen. So there is really that moment where you say, and from now on, the power is going to be there. And you will see that later when I talk about structure. Oops, sorry. One little thing is just might be too early for you, but I wanted to say it. The governance agreement, the description of what the governance system is and how it works. There are sample documents that we're giving out, have them on our website, so that not everybody has to reinvent the wheel, because writing a governance agreement is not necessarily something that you've done a few times in your life. So there are samples that you can just copy and fork and basically make your own version of it. Just simple things like what do you call your facilitator, your secretary? Do you say note taker or secretary? Do you say, like, what do you call your general circle, which I'll talk about in a bit? Like, just what are the words that you want to use? And yeah, that like making it your own. I find that important. So that's one strategy that we use in Sociocracy for All, is offering the materials, but you can then take them and change them. So they're there as a blueprint, but you have, it's self-governance, right? You have to make it your own. So that's the dance that we're dancing of. How do we offer all the things that we think are needed without being prescriptive about it? Because I hold the value very, very, like, it's a value that's dear to me, really giving groups full autonomy over what they do with their own system while being there and supporting. All right. So the last one here, what I said I would talk about the most, a circle system that grows with the group. And if you have no experience with sociocracy, you will get the hang of it sort of halfway through, I hope, if I explain it well. So this is, let's say this is our group. This is the community, the founding members, or maybe already a few more. So now these people are the group that starts meeting and is excited about at some point living in community with each other. Now, what just happens sort of as a natural thing and how humans tend to organize is that there will be like a subset of people that are taking care of one particular issue. For example, let's use an easy example. They could be taking care of the website. It's unlikely that 8 people, how many is it here? 7 people. 7 people together are gonna sit at the computer designing the website together for this community. That's probably not gonna happen. So probably that's gonna be a subset of people. Yet, probably in this early stage, these 3 people are going to check, like show the homepage to everybody and say like, hey, we built this homepage, we made this draft, do you like it? And then they're going to talk about it all together and they're going to approve it together. That's typically what happens. If they're daring in this stage, but it's rare at this stage, I would say, they're going to completely delegate it and say, you guys made the website, we trust you. It's unlikely, but might happen. And I'll get to that. Then what happens next is more people join. There's another group. This group might be starting the process team or starting to organize the meetings or something like that. So now what happens is we have some sort of transition of, okay, now and this is not necessarily always the case, but I'm just offering it as one of the choices. This group now becomes an autonomous group in that they are making decisions on their own. So now this group, for example, the website group, has earned enough trust and people have calmed down about the whole website thing. Now this group is managing the website and they're doing it autonomously, which means they have the decision-making power over the website. They don't have to go ask everybody for permission anymore. So these three people are now in charge of the website. And all the other decisions, that's why these three people are sort of double represented here. All the other decisions they might still make together. And it is really important to understand the difference between this scenario and this scenario. And I'm going to talk more about that here, because here, as I said, the decisions are made by the circle alone. While they might be getting feedback, they are calling the shots on the website. While this means the decisions are still made by everybody, while these people might be carrying it out and preparing it and so on. Understanding the difference between this scenario and this scenario is important to understand how sociocracy is different from whole group consensus. Because these are decision makers, while they still might be getting feedback from everybody, while in this scenario, everybody is a decision maker and these people are just carry outers of decisions that are made by everybody. Okay, so let's see what happens next. In that ideal sort of sociocratic system, now we might have several teams that are taking on responsibility. So let's say this is the website team. Now this group is the meeting organization team. They might call itself something like community life, if you wish. That's what that corresponding committee or circle is called in my community. So community life is now here. And maybe this group is the group that is doing outreach and marketing or something like that. Let's say the website is separate from marketing. Okay. Now something interesting happens. And now it's almost like an inversion. This is now the switch, like flipping the switch that I talked about earlier. This is ideally when the group has already started working through the governance stuff, and now they are making a decision. They're flipping the switch and switching power over into a system. Because what happens now is they still have those three teams, but, and this is still everybody here. So this is basically the definition of membership here, who's in and who's out in that circle. But now they're forming what we call a general circle. And what that means is that two people from each of those teams are now here for coordination. So now we've basically transitioned from having everybody decide on everything except for some of the things into everything that is something that needs a decision, that needs shepherding or fostering or whatever you want to call it, everything that needs taken care of, will now live in a circle. And the general circle does nothing else than just making sure that those circles that are taking care of things have good information flow between them. This is a strategy that in sociocracy we call double linking. So this circle and that circle is double linked, which means there are two people linking them. If you want the jargon with it, we call one of them the leader and one of them the delegate. And they have a little bit of a direction to it. The idea, but that's especially in co-housing, not always how it plays out, but the idea is that this person is carrying information from all of here into the circle, while that person is carrying information from here to the outside. The main thing is it's two people for redundance, so that if one person is sick, the other person can still report. So we're not going 8 weeks without hearing from the circle because they miss a meeting. The other reason is just for accountability. It actually makes a difference whether you have that second person in the room that was also at the meeting that you're reporting on. It changes the energy quite a bit to have that second person, and that general circle will have a more complete picture of what's actually happening in that group. So in this case, so if here everybody was meeting as the whole group as like 7, 8, 9 people, let's say 9 people here, plus maybe people who are only in the committee. Anyway, sort of everybody would be 9 people here, while now not everybody attends these meetings anymore. Okay, and I will talk more about what happens to the everybody meeting. That's a whole different thing. So we might have 2 people. I didn't really pay attention to numbers here because it's almost symbolic anyway. So don't get hung up on numbers. Those 2 is important, but the rest of the numbers are not so important. So we might have 2 people that are members of the group. They might move in the end, but they're not part of the working circle. Okay, hold on, what just changed? Oh, this group from the subcircle. So now we have a subcircle that might be taking care of one particular aspect of the work of what this circle is doing. Okay, let's just look at this here for a moment. Because now we've made the transition. Power has transitioned fully into circles. Coordination happens in the general circle. And now let me talk more about what these looks like, sort of status quo of where we're at now. So now we still have the work circles, and we all understand, I think, what that means. Those are the people who are working in a circle, making sure that the website happens, depending on what their work is, or maybe they're making sure the info session happens, or making sure a community and process has good meetings, and so on. There might be governance circles, things like that. And every community differs, like the basic outfit is typically very much the same, but groups differ in what they call it, how they organize it, what they prioritize, what group gels first, and so on. So there's a little bit of variation there. But the basic system here in terms of how governance works is this is a work circle, they make decisions about their work. So they might make policy decisions in their domain. Then we have the general circle, leaders and delegates. So those 6 people. And they have an interesting job because they don't technically have something that they are taking care of themselves, because everything is already taken care of by the work circles. So the only thing the general circle does is deciding who decides if there is a new issue, because all they're doing is making sure everything has a box where it can get decided and taken care of. So if there's something new, they would decide where that goes. In a perfect world, this group has hardly anything to do, except for hearing reports. Everything going great here? Okay, great. Everything going great here? Sounds great. What are you guys up to? Okay, looks like you're on it. Meeting is closed. Then, now it gets a little tricky. Now we're basically leaving classic sociocratic system, because in co-housing, we notice that what people still want to do is have that sense of the whole of when are we all coming together and meeting. And what we use in my community, and I know that other groups are doing that too, also co-ops, for example, will do that when they, like if they care about having all the members together at some point. And we call it full circle. That's not a sociocratic term, it's just what we call it. Full circle is the all-member meeting, and ideally, in a purely like perfect sociocratic system, that wouldn't even exist, and it definitely wouldn't make decisions. In co-housing, they might actually make decisions, but I would really reduce it to the absolute minimum of what they would have to decide. For example, some groups will put the final decision on which land are we gonna buy. Like that, where they would say, no, a circle will line that up and make all the decisions on the way, but then the final, yes, this is where we're putting our money, has to be made by everybody. And I get that. That makes a lot of sense. Or for example, the decision that still in my community, it lives in full circle, is the budget, the annual budget. One time a year, we meet at the very least as a full circle and we approve the budget. And in my community, governance decisions are made then. But that decisions would be made in full circle, like in the all member meeting, is very rare. It's once in a while there's a decision, but this is not a decision-making body per se, really. What we use it for, however, is have a place where we learn, where we hear about what circles have been doing, we give them feedback, and we just get to know each other better. And even after 20, whatever, 26 years now in this community, you can still get to know each other more deeply, and you can understand where people are now in their lives, how they're doing with aging, how are their grown-up kids doing. Like, there's so much to learn about each other that never ends, right? So connection is an ongoing thing that happens between all members. And then ideally, a group would have what we call a mission circle. A mission circle is sort of a whole different animal. Ideally, it's also double linked with two people being part of this circle, but also part of this circle. And it is a circle that is, its only function is holding the organization true to its mission. Are you doing what you said you would do in terms of what kind of organization you are? And it works pretty well if there are a bunch of community members on that mission circle, but also people from the outside, because it changes the vibe of that circle if there's people from the outside. And that could be, for example, some other big organization that's important in your town, or it could be a town official. It's something like the advisory board, where you want some outside information and also just some space of reflection, where you're not sort of in your own ways the whole time, but you're actually sort of leaning back and like, okay, how are we doing? Like, how are we doing as an organization? Like, where are we heading? Who are we? And I will get to questions in a little bit. So let me sort of stay on my narrative here, and then I will go to questions. I see them. And I'm almost done. So now the only thing I would like to do is, if this is the basic outfit of a farming community, let's say this would be sort of in terms of what the evolution is of a typical group. This would be around the time the community finds and buys land, maybe. So you have some work circles that are already in the swing of things. They know what they're doing. You have the mission circle in place, ideally. Like, this is ideal state. It's not always ideal. But if I could wave the magic wand, this is how it would go. There would be a mission circle already in place that is already making sure that there's some alignment with the mission, and that mission is really lived experience in the community. And you have some subcircles already taking care of things. Having a lot of subcircles also gives you the opportunity to find homes for incoming members that would then take care of something more special. Like, they focus on something that they're really experts on. Gives you a little bit more opportunity to differentiate and really put people on a task. Okay. Now, what happens over time, especially as you move in, maybe, your community, like your circle structure, doesn't change all that much as you move in, because you still need community building, you still need process. The site search committee or the building committee might turn into the building maintenance committee, but that's not a big jump, really, if you think about it. Instead of having marketing and onboarding new people, you might now turn into something like a membership committee or circle that is taking care of membership in the long run. So there's only, like, the focus changes a little bit of each circle, but especially community life, for example, it just stays the same. So that's what I like about a sociocratic structure. It basically grows like a glove. It just grows with you and just basically gives you that continuity. And those groups of people that are in circles together have that trusted relationship. They know what they're doing. They're sort of an established team that is in the swing of things and just continues doing that. So now we form more subcircles over time. And that's basically when we're complete. More people joining. So here's an example, but this is totally an example just to give you an idea. It can look different. I'm not, again, that's why I don't want to be prescriptive. I'm not saying this is how it has to be. I'm just saying, just as an idea so you can imagine something. It would be like, you have like site search committee here. And maybe these people are looking at the legal aspect of it, financial aspect of it, and these people are looking at site search just to like find that. Then this would be community life. I've already talked about that. And this might be marketing. One could also imagine that marketing and community life are together, but I put them separate just for the example. And here I've embedded a little video. I hope that's going to work well. This is a community treehouse that I tend to use as a do it like they did example, because I think they have things set up really well. And at a we do an annual conference, and Kate of that community, she gave a talk that I can give you the link to the recording, a talk where she showed sort of what their journey was. And she's doing this thing where she's just showing all like how their circle structure has changed over time. So hold on, let me pause this. So you see a general circle here, the mission or the board, they sort of put that together. Then they have planning, design, development with marketing, common spaces, land acquisition here. Membership, there's a governance circle, community life, learning and skill building and onboarding. And then there's finance and legal, and there's lawyers attached here. So that gives you an idea of how they set it up. And then in the next iteration, things changed a little bit. I think they simplified circles at that point. And then it changed over time quite a bit. These circles within circles are roles. So for example, they see a role of sociocracy support, tech support, and so on. So what that means is just that one person is sort of holding the attention and doing some work around one particular issue. It's like a little bit like a circle of one person, but that's a shortcut, but that's okay. And this is how it changed to, I think, what they had at least when the presentation was given. I'm sure it's changed again since. That's what these structures do. They grow as the community is paying attention to different things. Okay. Final slide. This is where I cut this out. So if you go to sociocracyforall.org/community, that's where all of our resources are aggregated that have to do with community, like co-housing community, intentional community in general. And this is Kate's presentation, Getting It Built with Sociocracy. So that was a group that started out using Sociocracy and built like that. And this is again what I said I would point out to you again at the end, the link to that set of videos, what I call study group curriculum, where groups can learn together and practice together. And it's all guided by videos. So the group would meet, for example, on Zoom or in person if you're lucky, and watch a video together, then do the exercise together on Zoom, then they watch again, and then they do an exercise together. So basically the videos walk you through the whole process, and it's 4 sessions, and it takes about 2 hours. Some groups are a little faster here, 2 hours each session, so 8 hours of training and group process together. How can some people decide on behalf of others, and why would those others agree to be stripped of decision-making power in matters that affect their lifestyle? Okay, I'm gonna take that one first. Because for the one reason that they see that it's useful. And I know not everybody can go there. That's why so many groups in particular struggle to go from whole group consensus where everybody decides everything to go to a system where we distribute authority, because of that very thing, that some groups are not willing to give up the power to a group. There's several footnotes to that. One is, when people want to hold the power, like I should be deciding on everything that affects me, if people say that, then you will end up in a situation where, let's say, 70 people are deciding everything together because they think it's very inclusive, because everybody is a member should have a voice, right? And that if we put 70 people into the same room deciding everything together, that's the most inclusive we can be. What they don't see is that putting 70 people into the same room making decisions is not inclusive at all. Because what happens if you have 70 people in the room? 5, 6, 7, 8 will talk, 60 will be quiet. It is not inclusive. It seems to be inclusive, and in practice, it is not. It's also not effective. So what you get then, and that's all the thing that's going to be next week, because that's the difference between whole group consensus and sociocracy. Whole group consensus sounds inclusive, and in many, I mean, some groups pull it off, but it tends to be smaller groups and very homogenous groups. The bigger you get, the harder it will be. So at some point, people suffer enough, for example, in 4-hour meetings, making a simple decision that just one team could take care of, like a low-stake decision. Sometimes people suffer enough to go like, okay, I just want a community where we can come together without arguing. What does it take to have that? Oh, we would have to distribute power, sure. Like the question is, how much do you need to suffer to get to that point? That to me is the question, because ultimately I think most groups get there. But then sometimes it becomes this political battle. So that's this whole other thing. So for me, it is simply out of practicability, people would do that, and out of the value of inclusiveness, of equal voice. If you have 70 people in the same room trying to make a decision,
Riding your bike around while
it amplifies some of the voices. One other thing is, why would a group have so much power? Or I mean, that's almost an overstatement, because they only have power in one particular aspect, right? Like, let's say just the marketing. They don't have power over everything. It is that this authority comes with a responsibility to take care of things, and it also comes with a responsibility to take in feedback. So in a well-oiled sort of sociocratic system, marketing circle will take care of business, and for major decisions, they will check back with a whole group of like, hey, we're making this big decision about this and that. What do you think? Like, let's gather all the input. And you can imagine that for, let's say, 5 people on marketing circle, it is fairly easy to get input from, let's say, 60 people. That's easier than 65 people making that decision together. You see that, like, just a numbers game. That's the logic of sociocracy. It's a different logic than what you, like, it's slightly counterintuitive, but once you're there, it makes perfect sense. All right, so that was long on that question, because that to me is, that's the key question one has to ask oneself. What system do I want to be in? How is the removal of decision-making power reconciled with condo laws? Yeah, most housing communities are legally set up of condominiums. Another excellent question here. That gets a little sticky, doesn't it? And I'm very much aware of it. So I can tell you how we do it. So we have several in Sociocracy for All. We've looked at several options, because, for example, co-ops, nonprofits, they all have similar issues. For example, the nonprofits, the board can't really pass on some of the responsibilities. They have to hold them. So how do you wed a system that is determined by law with a system where you want to distribute? That there's a little bit of a mismatch there. So you have to be able to work that together again. There are a few workarounds that we use. One, for example, that we use is that, and let me screen share because I want like pointing to things. So if we have the system, which is more or less a system that we have, more or less, give or take. Okay. So remember, full circle is the everybody meeting. So everybody who's in a circle, including the people who are not in a circle, and those people exist in my community. And we have about maybe 20 people or so, maybe even more, that are not part of a circle. They do their thing. They're great members of the community, but they're not part of meetings. So, but now if everybody meets, let's say for a budget meeting or for any other connection meeting, everybody's in the room. And let's say some people, let's say, I don't remember, is it 5 people? Our official board that only exists on paper, they've never met, not a single time our board has met, okay? So if everybody's in the room, the board is in the room too, right? So if now everybody makes a decision, and then for 30 seconds, the board says, Is that our decision? Yeah, basically the board rubber stamps the community decision, and we can say, oh yeah, the board decided it. We're good. So you see how we're meeting the requirement while being true to the value that we hold of distribution and making decisions as a collective in our own way. So there are ways of doing it. It all needs to be looked at of what is the specific requirement and do we have a way of meeting that in a way that we can, with integrity, I guess. Okay. Do you believe you can rotate people in the circus annually or biannually? Every circle can decide that the way they want to decide it. We have a circle, buildings and grounds, that has had the same leader for, I think, the entire existence of that circle, of that group, even pre-sociocracy. Why? Because he's the best one at the job. Why use somebody else? Everybody's happy with him. I wouldn't want to submit to a rule that doesn't make sense because everybody wants him, so why not do it? You can make any kind of rule there. And by the way, one thing that I haven't talked about at all here is how we make decisions is by consent. So we make a decision if there is no objection. And that's also how we select people. So each group will, let's say this circle will decide by consent that they form a subcircle, or they will decide by consent who's going to be that link. So this person will only be in that role if everybody who's a circle member consents to that decision. And that way we can be sure that this person is not just in that position just because they are, or because they always have been, or because they're the biggest bully in town. They actually need to behave in a way so they can get the support of everybody in the circle who works alongside with them. Sometimes there's one strong person who needs to be in the general circle regardless. I hear you. Is there a limit on the recommended number of working groups that one person should be in? One thing I've noticed in our beginning community is that with only 7 people, most folks are in at least 2 working circles, if not more. I would say we're still in the first stage. We're all making decisions during a meeting with everybody. Also, at what number of people would you suggest changing to the next step where we will switch to a truly sociocratic circle structure? Okay, so in terms of numbers, so yes, it is very common that many people will be on many circles. And I guess there's a few things one can do here. How am I on time? Okay. In the sort of early stage that you're referring to, let's do this one. You might have one committee that is already sort of budding out into its own thing, but the rest is still making decisions together. I forgot the question. Hold on, let me remind myself. Yes. So now, of course, what I didn't draw, because it's really hard to draw, I would have loved to draw it, but I didn't, is that this person is at the same time that person, right? So that can happen. Well, actually, I did draw it at some point. Sort of, I alluded to it, that these people are like in the same, like, it's not overlap between circles. It's just that those 2 people happen to be in this group, but also in that group. And that you will have. I wouldn't put a limit on it, because for some people, let's say you have somebody who's retired and puts all their energy into this project, I wouldn't necessarily limit how much they can do unless it becomes a problem. I think everybody really has to watch out for that. And one way of watching out for that is noticing whether people can still hold the attention for all the pieces. If you're in 8 circles and you can't hold the attention anymore, it becomes a problem. If you're in 8 circles and you're a valuable member in 8 circles, then there is no problem. So I wouldn't put a number on it. My gut instinct is that everybody who's also doing things outside of this project probably can only hold attention to 2 or 3 circles. That's totally throwing out a number thing. At what number of people would you suggest changing to the next step where we switch to a truly sociocratic structure? This step, I think the way I drew it is actually fairly accurate. In my experience, only people with a lot of experience can operate in sociocracy with something like under 10 people, because it sort of gets a little like it ties a knot in your brain of like, in which role am I speaking right now? Like, who am I right now in this sort of constellation? So once you're at 12, 15 people, it becomes more obvious what the circles even are. So I would say 15 people, then you sort of make that switch. Maybe 18, but then it's about time to make that switch. Sort of but that's totally me just sort of speaking from intuition right now. That's my sense of groups. It also depends on how involved people are and so on. So it's really just a ballpark. Um, do you have knowledge of problems with the model? 2 or 3 years from implementation, new groups, not cohesive groups like Pioneer Valley. So hold on. So you're talking about found like groups that are forming problems with this model? Yes. The biggest problem is if people are not well trained. Huge problem. If they use it sort of in a half-hearted way, that typically doesn't go well. Some other problem, I mean, all of those things that basically have to do with how well it's done, I guess. So once people understand the system, it's rare that there would be problems. There's the legal sphere, there is taking care of onboarding and making sure that your influx of people is also understanding the system so the culture stays intact. Sometimes people experience a little bit of fragmentation of only focusing on their work circles and not so much on the big everything. And that, but there's an easy solution of just making sure you have more intentional spaces where you meet as a whole group and you do fun things together. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's sort of issues or problems. There are things that show up, but that then can be dealt with. So you're not a victim to the system. You can make whatever changes you want to make. Okay, when group is small, it's hard to have double linking. Maybe some things just need to be a role within a circle. Yes. So if let me actually explain that answer because it's such a good answer. I'm still sharing, right? Let's say, so now, sorry, I have two screens and one is covering one. So if we have this group, no, I want to have this step. So between this and that, okay, the question is, do we form this circle or don't we? And it's a little misrepresented with so many people here. It would probably be more like, do we have those three people forming a subcircle or don't we? And then if it feels like a stretch too thin if you form that circle, it might be a better idea. For example, if this is, what did I say earlier, what this was? Marketing. Let's say if this is running the info sessions and it is realistically one person that is doing it and is holding it well, then you can create the role where you say, okay, you're the info session person. Everything info session you do. Tell us if you need help. If you have a decision to make and you want input, let us know. So you can basically attach it to one person. And as it gets bigger and you have more people, you turn that role into a full circle and into like a complete circle. So there are in between things, but that gets a little bit into the details and the fine print. I'm here for the broad sweep.